Here's what the history books will tell you. Dean Martin died on Christmas Day 1995 in his Malibu mansion. Heart failure, lung cancer, 78 years old. The man simply got old and stopped breathing. Nice and neat. Tidy. The kind of death that lets everyone sleep at night. But here's the thing about official stories. They're designed to make us comfortable. They're designed to let us believe that icons fade gracefully, that legends simply run out of gas like vintage Cadillacs rolling to a peaceful stop on some sunny California highway. Bullshit. The people who actually knew Dean Martin, the ones who looked him in the eyes during those final years, who sat across from him at dinner tables watching him stare at empty chairs, they knew something different. They knew the truth that no obituary would ever print because the truth is too raw, too painful, too goddamn human for our sanitized version of celebrity death. Dean Martin didn't die in 1995. Not really. The thing that made Dean Martin who he was, the spark, the soul, the reason he got up in the morning, that died 9 years earlier. November 14th, 1986. That was the day a satellite phone rang in his Malibu home, and a voice on the other end spoke 7 words that ended his life. Mr. Martin, your son's plane is lost. Everything after that? That was just his body going through the motions. A ghost in expensive suits, a shell walking around for 9 years waiting for permission to finally stop pretending he wanted to be here. This is the story of how a father died the moment his son did. This is about the music stopping, forever. Let me tell you about Paul Martin. Not the tabloid version, not the son of a legend cliché. The real guy. Captain Dean Paul Martin was the kind of human being that makes you question what the hell you're doing with your own life. State champion skier, US Open tennis semifinalist, Broadway actor with a Tony nomination, jazz fusion guitarist who could make a guitar weep. And if all that wasn't enough to make you feel like a complete underachiever, he was also a captain in the United States Air Force, flying T-38 Talon interceptors, supersonic jets that break the sound barrier before you finish your morning coffee. This wasn't some rich kid playing dress-up with daddy's money. This was substance. Real, earned, legitimate excellence in every arena he touched. Dean had spent decades perfecting an image. The lovable drunk, the smooth crooner who made everything look effortless. It was a performance, a mask. Behind closed doors, he was disciplined as hell, meticulous, almost monkish in his dedication to craft. But nobody knew that. They saw the champagne glass and the lazy smile and thought that was the whole story. Paul was different. Paul was proof. Paul was Dean saying to the world, "You think I'm just some lucky showbiz hack? Look at this. Look at what I raised. This is what happens when you actually give a damn." For a man who'd spent his entire adult life being misunderstood, Paul was vindication. Living, breathing evidence that beneath the tuxedo and the martini glass jokes, there was a father who'd done something right in this fucked up industry that eats people alive. But here's what made their relationship different from every other Hollywood father-son dynamic. They were genuinely best friends. Not the publicist-approved best friends you read about in People magazine. Actually close. They didn't just play golf together, they played chess marathons that lasted until 3 in the morning. They didn't just talk. They had the kind of philosophical conversations that most fathers and sons are too scared, or too proud, or too damaged to have. Dean Martin was famous for keeping everyone at arm's length. It was his thing, his brand. The perpetual cool customer who never let anyone see him sweat, never let anyone get too close. He'd built this great wall of detachment that nobody could scale, except Paul. Paul had the key to every door Dean had locked. Paul saw the man behind all the masks, the insecure kid from Steubenville, Ohio, the immigrant son who'd clawed his way to the top and spent every day terrified someone would figure out he didn't belong there. In Paul, Dean saw something he'd spent his entire life searching for. Continuation. Not just biological continuation. Any idiot can make a baby. Dean saw legacy. He saw his name meaning something beyond entertainment, beyond the shallow glitter of show business. Paul made the Martin name stand for dignity, honor, something real. This is important to understand. Paul wasn't just Dean's son. He was Dean's compass, his true north. When the pressure got insane, when Sinatra was being Sinatra, when the studio was demanding another film, when the fakery of Hollywood felt suffocating, Dean would think about Paul, his kid, his captain. out there serving his country, flying jets, living a life of actual meaning. And suddenly all the industry bullshit felt manageable. Dean would show Paul's picture to anyone who'd look. "My captain," he'd say, and you could hear the pride cracking through that woman's cool facade. "He conquers the skies. I just sing melodies." It was a humble brag, sure, but it was also the most honest thing Dean ever said. He worshipped his son. He'd look at Paul and see everything he wished he could be: brave without pretending, talented without performing, respected for substance, not style. That worship, that profound, unspoken connection, is what made November 1986 not just a tragedy. It made it an annihilation of identity. November 14th, 1986. Thursday. Unremarkable in every way except one. It was the day the universe decided to remind Dean Martin that fairness is a children's story we tell ourselves so we can sleep at night. Los Angeles was doing its usual thing. Gray morning, that damp California chill that doesn't quite commit to being cold. Dean was at home in Malibu, probably rehearsing material for his upcoming Vegas show, sipping herbal tea, completely unaware that 3,000 miles north, his entire world was about to implode. Alaska, the Denali mountain range near Anchorage. If you've never been, picture this: 20,000-foot peaks of permanent ice and granite, weather systems that form out of nowhere like nature's middle finger to human ambition. On this particular Thursday, an Arctic cyclone was bearing down on Denali, the second highest peak in North America, with the kind of meteorological violence that grounds every plane, every helicopter, everything with wings. Dense white fog, ice crystals suspended in the air like microscopic razors, turbulence that could snap a wing like a toothpick. And into this nightmare flew Captain Paul Martin and Captain James Mitchell. Two T-38 Talons, supersonic interceptors, beautiful machines capable of Mach speeds, launched from Elmendorf Air Force Base at dawn. Emergency rescue mission, critical. A research vessel had gone down in the Bering Sea, crew stranded, time running out. The mission was simple on paper: navigate through the storm, reach the coordinates, guide the rescue operation. The kind of thing Paul had done 100 times. Routine. Except there's no such thing as routine when you're flying into an Arctic cyclone at 600 miles per hour with visibility measured in feet instead of miles. At 6:47 Pacific time, Paul's flight computer requested a course change: northwest vector to avoid a massive wall of clouds blocking their route. Elmendorf Control approved the maneuver, standard procedure. But in the absolute chaos of that white hell, something went catastrophically wrong. Here's what people don't understand about flying in conditions like that. Your instruments lie to you. The magnetic anomalies around Denali, a mountain so massive it creates its own weather systems, its own gravitational distortions, they make your gauges go haywire. Your altimeter says you're at 15,000 feet when you're actually at 12. Your compass spins, your horizon indicator becomes a cruel joke. You're flying blind in a milk-white void where up and down lose meaning, where the mountain you're trying to avoid becomes invisible until it's filling your windscreen. The T-38 was traveling at Mach 0.9. For those of you who don't speak fighter pilot, that's roughly 600 miles per hour. At that speed, you don't have time to be afraid. You barely have time to register what's happening before physics takes over. Paul requested the northwest turn to avoid the cloud wall. The controller approved. The maneuver made perfect sense on paper, but in that swirling white chaos with instruments feeding him corrupted data and visibility measured in arm's lengths, the jet didn't turn away from Denali. It turned directly into it. 20,000 feet of frozen granite and ice, an immovable wall that's been standing since before humans figured out fire. And here comes this beautiful piece of American engineering, this triumph of aerospace technology, this machine that cost taxpayers millions and represented the pinnacle of military aviation. Completely irrelevant. The mountain doesn't care about your engineering. The mountain doesn't negotiate. In the milky white blindness of that Arctic hell, Paul wouldn't have seen the rock face until the absolute final microsecond. Maybe not even then. One moment, flight. The sensation of control, of purpose, of racing toward a rescue mission that mattered. Next moment, nothing. No time for last words, no time for regrets or prayers or that cliché moment where your life flashes before your eyes. Just the brutal, instantaneous transition from alive to not alive, from existence to absence. The physics of it are almost incomprehensible. 600 miles per hour into an unyielding wall of stone. The human body, that fragile collection of water and bone and hope, doesn't survive impacts like that. Nothing survives impacts like that. The T-38 disintegrated. Paul and James Mitchell ceased to exist in the same heartbeat. Instant, complete, final. And 3,000 miles south, Dean Martin was still rehearsing, still sipping tea, still existing in a world where his son was alive, where the universe still made a kind of sense, where being a good father and working hard and doing everything right actually meant something. He had maybe 30 more minutes of that world left. The explosion was titanic, fuel and metal and human bodies converting into energy in a fraction of a second. But the Arctic storm swallowed it whole. A flash of light dissolved into whiteness, the sound consumed by howling wind. Debris scattered across a half-mile radius of ice and rock, already being buried by fresh snow. It was the kind of death that leaves no witnesses. No black box recording to analyze, no dramatic final transmission. Just a sudden, absolute absence where two men used to be. In Malibu, the satellite phone sat silent on Dean's kitchen counter. Maybe he glanced at the ocean through his window. Maybe he watched seagulls riding the thermals. Maybe he thought about what he'd have for lunch. Completely normal thoughts. Completely oblivious to the fact that his son, his captain, his proof that life meant something, had just been erased from existence. The universe doesn't send you a notification when someone you love dies. There's no cosmic alarm bell. Your body doesn't know to start grieving. You just continue existing in ignorance for a few more hours while reality slowly catches up. At Elmendorf Air Force Base, radar operators were staring at their screens watching the impossible happen in real time. The transponder signal from Talon 7, the electronic heartbeat that said, "I'm here, I'm alive, I'm okay," just vanished. Not fading, not drifting, just gone. Like someone flipped a switch from exists to doesn't exist. Talon 7, respond immediately. Talon 7, do you copy? The operator's voice climbing in pitch with each unanswered call. Professional training trying to hold back the tide of panic, because they knew what a disappeared transponder meant in those conditions. Static. Dead air. The sound of nothing where something used to be. And in that static, in that terrible absence of response, lived the nightmare that would consume Dean Martin for the next 9 years of his life. But he didn't know yet. For a few more hours, he got to live in the before time. The time when his son was still alive. When the world still operated according to rules that made sense. When being Dean Martin, legend, icon, the man who made coolness an art form, still felt like enough. The first hours after the transponder vanished were confusion, growing concern, delayed return. Search protocols initiated. Maybe they diverted. Maybe they landed somewhere else. Maybe the radio equipment failed. Maybe. Hope is a stubborn bastard. It clings to life even when logic is screaming that it's over. The satellite phone finally rang. That particular electronic chirp that's somehow different from a regular phone. More insistent, more urgent, like it knows it's carrying bad news across impossible distances. Dean probably thought it was Paul calling to say the mission ran long. Maybe apologize for making him worry. That's what fathers do when the phone rings after a delay. They imagine the reassuring conversation that's about to happen. Instead, he got a Pentagon official. Military voice. Trained to deliver information without emotion because emotion makes these conversations impossible. Mr. Martin, your son's aircraft has been lost over Alaskan territory. Lost. That word is designed to preserve hope while simultaneously destroying it. Lost means maybe he's still out there. Maybe he ejected. Maybe he's in a survival shelter waiting for rescue. Lost isn't dead. Lost leaves room for miracles. But lost also carries the weight of probability, the statistical certainty that in Arctic conditions, in that terrain, at those speeds, lost is just the polite word they use before they find the bodies. Dean entered a 5-day purgatory that would make Dante look like an optimist. The Arctic storm was so violent that rescue helicopters couldn't fly. Literally grounded. Ground teams couldn't reach the area. Avalanches, -40 temperatures, zero visibility. The mountain had taken his son, and now it was refusing to give him back, refusing to even let him know for certain what had happened. Dean sat in his leather chair in the living room and simply stopped functioning as a human being. Didn't sleep, didn't eat. chain-smoked Cuban cigars until the house filled with gray smoke that mirrored the state of his soul. Just sat there staring at that satellite phone like he could will it to ring with good news through sheer force of desperate hope. His eyes were locked on that device with an intensity that would have been funny if it wasn't so completely soul-destroying to witness. Like if he stared hard enough, if he wanted it badly enough, he could bend reality. Make Paul alive again through nothing but paternal desperation. Friends tried to help, tried to offer comfort. Maybe they ejected. Maybe they're in a shelter somewhere. Maybe... Dean didn't hear them, couldn't hear them. His entire consciousness had narrowed to a single point, waiting for certainty in either direction. Alive or dead. Heaven or hell. Just tell me which universe I'm living in now. 5 days of that. 5 days of existing in quantum superposition where his son was simultaneously alive and dead until observation collapsed the wave function. 5 days of his intuition screaming the truth, while his hope desperately tried to negotiate with physics. On the 5th day, the weather broke. The storm exhausted itself like all storms eventually do, leaving behind crystalline Arctic silence and a sky so clear it felt like mockery. The CH-47 rescue helicopters, massive military birds built to handle impossible conditions, finally lifted off. They flew search patterns over Denali's northern face, looking for any sign, any indication, any reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, this story had a different ending than the one everyone already knew was coming. They found the scar on the mountain, a black streak across pristine white snow. Metal fragments scattered across a half-mile radius like some abstract art installation made of aviation-grade aluminum and shattered dreams. Pieces of what used to be a T-38 Talon, now just wreckage being slowly buried by fresh powder. No ejection seats deployed, no emergency beacons activated, no survival shelters erected, no footprints leading away from the impact site. Nothing. Just absence and debris and the absolute finality of physics. The official conclusion came through that satellite phone in language designed to be clinical, because if you make it emotional, nobody can say it. Captain Dean Paul Martin and Captain James Mitchell were killed instantly upon primary contact with the terrain. Death was instantaneous. They didn't suffer. That last part, they didn't suffer, is what people always say. Like it makes it better somehow. Like knowing your son was obliterated so quickly he didn't have time to be afraid is supposed to provide comfort. When Dean heard the confirmation, he didn't scream, didn't throw things, didn't have a dramatic Hollywood breakdown. He just imploded, collapsed inward like a building during controlled demolition. All the support structures simultaneously giving way, the facade crumbling to reveal nothing but empty space underneath. It looked like someone had literally cut all the strings holding a puppet upright. That spark in his eyes, that famous devil-may-care twinkle that had charmed the entire planet for 3 decades, it flickered, dimmed, and went dark. Permanently. He set down the phone, sat back in his chair, stared at a blank television screen, and the silence in that room became so profound, so absolute, it was like sound itself had died. This was the sound of a heart breaking in a way that can't be fixed. The sound of a man realizing that everything he'd believed about how the world works, work hard, be good, protect your family, was a lie. The sound of faith in cosmic justice dying in real time. The funeral was coming, but Dean Martin had already left the building. The funeral was a blur. Black limousines stretching down the street, celebrities crying for the cameras, military orchestra playing taps, the folded American flag handed to Paul's widow. All the pageantry of honoring a hero. Dean was there physically. His spirit was already in Alaska, wandering those frozen peaks, looking for his son. He moved like an automaton, dark aviator sunglasses hiding eyes that had gone from sparkling to vacant. People tried the usual platitudes. He was a true hero. At least it was instant. And Dean nodded mechanically, hearing nothing. His ears were filled with static. The only sound penetrating was silence. The silence where Paul's laugh used to be. At the closed casket, Dean looked like he'd aged 20 years overnight. All that vitality, that legendary charisma, evaporated, replaced by this hollow, ash-colored shell. He touched the metal with such tenderness, like tucking Paul in one last time. Witnesses said he whispered something. Maybe forgive me. Maybe I'll follow soon. After the ceremony, Dean barricaded himself in the Malibu mansion. Gates locked, phone lines disconnected. The world wanted Dean Martin back. Dean Martin wanted oblivion. He felt cosmically cheated. He'd played by the rules, worked himself to exhaustion, given joy to millions. And this was his reward? Burying his child? He shed his celebrity like a snake sheds skin. Didn't care about contracts, recordings, ratings. Just sat watching documentaries about space exploration, where heroism meant something, where tragedy served progress, where the universe felt logical instead of the cruel joke it had become in 1986. In 1989, Sinatra organized an emergency reunion tour. Legends reunited. He thought the magic of the stage might resurrect his friend. He was wrong. Dean didn't want healing, he wanted peace. The tour was a catastrophe. Reno, Seattle, Phoenix. Dean looked like a lost ghost, forgetting lyrics, dropping the microphone. In Phoenix, he finally said it. "Frank, I need to leave." Threw down the mic, walked straight to the airport. That night was the last time the real Rat Pack existed. The final 9 years were monastic. Every evening, Dean would put on his three-piece suit, habit, dignity, and go to Osteria Marino or Trattoria Bella Vista. Same table, osso buco, Chianti, and an empty place sitting across from him. The empty chair for Paul. Dinner with a ghost. He'd sit for hours, eating slowly, staring through walls, having conversations only he could hear. Fans would ask for autographs. He'd smile that dead smile. "My pleasure, friend." Eyes vacant, just counting days. Prison of existence, waiting for parole. Sammy died in 1990. Another blow, but mostly he missed the boy in the ice. He told a friend once, "Death doesn't frighten me one bit. Everyone worth loving is waiting there." Christmas 1995. Lung cancer had destroyed his organs, but grief had killed his will. He closed his eyes. Soft exhale. The silence finally embraced him completely. Vegas dimmed its lights. Sinatra wept. But those who loved him felt relief. The suffering was over. The pilot had landed. The father was waiting at the gate. The lesson is brutal but true. Fame is illusion. Wealth is dust. Medals are meaningless. Only love matters. Love powerful enough to break a titan like Dean Martin. Love so mighty that life without it became impossible. That's the greatest legacy. When you hear everybody loves somebody, remember the man who died of a shattered heart on Alaskan ice, and the father who spent 9 years staring at an empty chair, waiting for his boy to come home. Rest in peace, Paul. Your wings are finally yours forever.